Conkers Bad Fur Day is an early 2001 title released on the Nintendo 64. Conker was birthed as a kid-friendly, wide-eyed, cartoony mascot character meant to have a game similar to many that Rareware had been pumping out at that time. While the game could have ended up like Banjo-Kazooie or Donkey Kong 64, the development process took a decidedly more adult turn later in the game's development. But before we get into all of that, let's just talk about the game as it ended up. A 3D adventure platformer that was released late in the life cycle of the Nintendo 64. While I'd call the game an adventure game, it's also surprisingly a lot about solving puzzles. The A button jumps and the B button will typically attack enemies with a frying pan. There are also context-sensitive buttons on the ground scattered throughout the world that will perform different actions given the environment. Still, even action sequences play out more like puzzle-solving quests. For instance, there's a level where you have to get a bowl to hit a target to trigger a door opening. Then you have to ride the bowl and sort of attack a calf that's released from behind the door until you get it to drink prune juice. While some things are made glaringly obvious and may even be pointed out in cutscenes, others are a little more obtuse and you just have to figure out what to do. While talking about this game with my friend Mike, who some of you may remember from the 30 Days of Gaming podcast series I did a while back, look for a playlist here on my YouTube channel, he mentioned how we would have craved a game like this when we were younger. It doesn't hold your hand, and it doesn't just move you on a linear path from one area to the next. Even early on in the game, I could navigate across different areas and jump back and forth between sections, handling things in orders surely never intended by the developers. That's not to say the game is an open world, just that not everything is as straightforward as one might expect from a Nintendo 64 game. If you didn't have a walkthrough or a player's guide, this is the kind of game where you could spend hours in it and never scratch the surface. But these days I like to just experience a story-driven game and get it over with. Back then, you could only afford a couple of new games a year, too, but now that I'm an adult with less time on my hands, I'm always looking for the kind of game that's just a story that I can play through very quickly and then move on to the next one. It's interesting to consider how I would have thought of this game differently when I was younger. Anyway, back to the game. Conkers Bad Fur Day, as I said, was late in the life cycle of the Nintendo 64, releasing only about 6 months before the GameCube itself launched. Considering how Rareware had contributed to the development of and utilized the expansion pack for games like DK64 and Perfect Dark, the fact that Conker doesn't require an expansion pack is kind of surprising. Even more, it's just how good the game looks without it. The 3D models are good and their faces are expressive, and everything in the game is extremely well animated. The draw distance is quite impressive, mostly helped by smart level design, and the textures are a lot more crisp than most Nintendo 64 games, even though, again, this game doesn't require nor even take advantage of the expansion pack. That's not to say the game isn't loaded with onboard memory. Weighing in at more than 8 times the size of Super Mario 64. The game is absolutely jam-packed with dialogue. It's not just a cutscene here or there, either. The game uses brief cutaways constantly. Voice clips can be heard as you roam around the world. And the music, while maybe not the most memorable, certainly has its, shall we say, iconic moments.
Uh-oh.
Me. I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my...
Yes, this game does recycle some well-known sound libraries from Rare's catalog. The familiar sound of walking across a diamond plate or metal floor from GoldenEye or Perfect Dark makes a return, for instance, among others, but the majority of the game's sound design boils down to dialogue choices, and the voice work is, well, gee, how do I put this? Some voices are extremely well done. Some may be hammed up a little too much, but honestly I think my biggest problem with the game is Conker himself. I was hoping for more, but he's awfully quiet and mumbles a lot. Which is interesting from a character perspective, someone who's kind of snarky under their breath, but maybe not confident enough to be over the top and obnoxious. But I just feel like the voice acting could have been handled differently.
There I am. conquer the king. King of all the land. Who'd have thought that? But how did I come to this, I hear you say? And who are those strange fellows that surround my throne? I hear you also say. Well, it's a long story. Come closer, and I'll tell you. It all started yesterday. And what a day that was. It's what I call a bad fur day.
The story of Conker's development has been told to death, and the Rare Replay compilation is a great source of information for anyone looking for behind-the-scenes information on the development of Bad Fur Day. But the story that never seems to get told is the story of the game itself. A story which begins, like so many others, in the instruction manual. A good night leads to a bad day. Conker had mentally left the conversation. His mind wandered to thoughts of his girlfriend Barry and why she had such a problem with him having fun without her. As he sat contemplating giving her a call, he moved uncomfortably in his chair. His bladder ache had now reached the point where it couldn't be ignored. "Conker," came the cry from the group seated around the table, making Conker jump. "It's your turn." Okay, but first I've got to call Barry to let her know I'll be late." He stood unsteadily, then just before staggering off, decided that maybe the toilet was a more pressing issue. The evening wore on, and the beer kept flowing. One round became another, and then another, until Conker reached that awful moment of realization. Guys, I think I've had too much." He paused for a moment, nearly retching then and there. "I gotta go." At the next table, a couple of pretty little chipmunks sniggered and whispered something to each other as Conker tottered slightly, then nearly lost his balance completely. "I don't think he can handle his drink," he overheard the nearest one say. "No, indeed," her sly-looking friend replied. Conker toyed with the idea of vomiting on the both of them, but decided that perhaps it wasn't such a good idea with their boyfriends sitting opposite. For some reason, they were dressed in combat fatigues and engaged in a most heated debate. "The war. The evil teddy bears have overrun the gray squirrel's homeland. We signed up this morning, and you should do the same, Mr. Red Squirrel." At this point, several gray squirrels around the alehouse leveled accusing gazes at Conker. "If you have any sense of decency and honor, that is." "I think you just hit the nail on the head," Conker replied as he attempted to stand once more. "I'm definitely going now. Goodbye." On the way out, two of his old school chums grabbed him by the arm, shouting, "One more for the road, Conker," and before he knew it, slammers? Oh no, not slammers. They were lined up in front of him, 8 in total. Oh well, tomorrow was another day. Honestly, I'm more confused now than when I was just playing the game. Alright, first of all, many things do line up. The game begins with Conker leaving the tavern after calling his girlfriend Barry, but in the game it seems like a simple quest to get Conker home quickly turns into something else, as the fabled Panther King begins hunting just the right red squirrel. The two things literally have nothing to do with one another, they just slowly get spelled out through cutscenes. And what was that the manual said about a war? That barely gets touched on until you're close to halfway through the game. Even though the Panther King is out to get Conker, why? I mean, how do they know they want him in particular? It seems a bit arbitrary and sudden. Conker's just some drunk guy trying to find his way home. And all this stuff that's happening around Conker, why does he feel like it's his job to be the Good Samaritan to help out the Queen Bee, or the King Bee, or the Dung Beetles, or really anyone else for that matter? When did all of this become his job? Isn't he sober now? Shouldn't he just know how to get home? Why doesn't he ever just stop and ask himself, will any of these random tasks help me get home any faster? In this game, it's like one of those movies that just goes one step too far with a series of unlikely occurrences all happening at once. Even death in this game is handled by an unnecessarily long cutscene. Even without knowing the backstory of the game's development, it seems clear that the game had pivoted at some point. And it also seems like the game is just a relic of its time. It's a lot of 90s style toilet humor, but remember, even Beavis and Butthead had been off the air for a few years by the time this game came out. Its lack of direction makes the game hard to follow. Things that would be side quests in other games are front and center here and feel like a chore. and the humor makes you chuckle here and there, but it wears thin pretty quickly. For a game with so many warnings that it's not to be played by anyone under 17, I sure think it would be best loved by boys around 14. And as for the actual fiction surrounding Conker and his bad fur day, considering the 3-page introduction in the manual and all of the dialogue in the game, it's sad to say that basically the game has very little in the way of actual story. It has lots of things happening that are conveyed through dialogue, but not much story. The game doesn't even try to veil things behind innuendo or suggestion. The manual specifically calls out beer getting Conker drunk. Characters curse left and right, and large-breasted women, I guess, are just ogled. The game isn't trying to be coy, it's just trying to be crude. Too many ideas got mashed together at once, and maybe things make more sense if you conquer later levels. But when first setting out, things are definitely hairy, or is that furry, in our story so far. Hey everybody, thanks for watching episode number 60 of Our Story So Far TV. I'm Garrett, and I always appreciate your feedback, so feel free to leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, and if you really like what you saw, subscribe to the channel. If you want to chat with me, I'm always on Twitter, @NewAngel, that's NUANGEL. If you want to see more, the YouTube algorithm just isn't doing it for you, just go over to ourstorysofar.tv, where I have every episode archived in 1080p. I try to keep on a pretty regular schedule, so you should have a new episode in 2 weeks. Until next time, take care of yourself.